Yo, what's going on, everybody? So, I wanted to hop on here today and talk about something a little different. I want to talk about something that I've struggled with my whole life, and that's finding pride. Being proud of yourself. It's something that I very solemnly have felt, and for the majority of my life, I feel like I've made the same mistake. I've always kind of just done the bare minimum, just enough to maintain. Like, on paper, I have what would be considered a normal life. I've hit the marks, but I still feel empty about it. I'm not proud of anything I do. And anytime I see somebody who's, fulfilled and taking pride in either their career or a hobby they have, like someone who's really good at stuff and they love to talk about it, I'm so envious of that because I feel like I've been in search of that feeling my whole life, fulfillment, accomplishment. When I was in high school, I wasn't a good student and I wasn't a bad student either. I just did the bare minimum, just enough to make sure that I didn't draw any attention to myself. I didn't really try. School wasn't necessarily hard for me. I just didn't apply myself. And I did the same thing in college, and now I feel like I'm doing the same thing with work. I'm kind of just existing. You know that saying, do what you love, never work a day in your life? Well, that's always kind of drove me nuts. It's pissed me off because it sounds great. I want that. I want that so desperately. But what if you've never really loved anything or you don't know how to find it? Because then what? If you don't know what you love, are you just fucked? Like, because that's me. I've always been waiting to stumble upon what I'm passionate about. I had this college roommate. He was one of my closer friends. He was in a program he loved. In his spare time, he was excited to work on projects related to his course. He'd be coding random shit all the time, watching videos, talking about it. There'd be a bunch of us getting ready to go out on a Friday night, and half the time he would just stay home and work on his projects. He'd be chilling, doing his thing. He was invested. And that was like one of the first people I've ever met where I thought, like, damn, you really love this shit. And he ended up getting a co-op, crushed it, got hired right out the gate, graduated early, the whole 9 yards. And I met him in residence on our first day of school, and just a few years later, he had like a full career. Meanwhile, I had finished college too, but I was no better off than the first day I met him. I had spent 3 years just kind of skating by again. And you would have thought, like, after seeing that, after having a front row seat to him achieving everything and being fulfilled and being proud of himself and hitting his goals, I'd be motivated to like get my shit together. But I didn't. I still didn't understand how to find what he had. I was operating under this assumption that he had picked something that he had a passion for. And I was so envious of it. I was like, where can I find that, man? Like, I wanted that so bad. And after college, I just kept working these low end jobs for a while, drinking on the weekends, smoking weed. Again, I found myself just kind of skating by. The only thing that stopped me was COVID hit, and I couldn't work anymore. My job shut down. And eventually I did. I decided it was time I was going to try hard at something. I was going to apply myself for the first time in my life. And this was much later down the line. This was when the pandemic was ending. I went into debt enrolling in a web development boot camp. It was pretty difficult, but I knew that a lot of tech companies would come in and they would hire the junior developers from like the top percentile of the class. So I went like as hard as possible to ensure I was in that position. I mean, for me, it was like do or die. Like I had spent all my money on this, and if I got hired, it was going to be the most money I'd ever made. So I had to be there. And that was pretty much the first time in my life I had done anything where I felt a sense of pride. Legitimately, the first time I felt proud of myself. I felt accomplished, but it was a blip. I got the job and everything, but that sense of fulfillment, it didn't last. And now today, skip all these years ahead because I've been working here for a handful of them. I'm just back to where I started. I'm just skating through. I'm in the day to day, just kind of existing in my job. I don't come away from my day feeling like I've done anything of importance. I'm not proud of myself. I've been in this spot for a few years, and that blip of being proud wore off very quickly. I find myself upset and consumed by the thoughts that I don't have this grand fulfillment and passion. Like, how do I get that? How do I do what I love so I don't feel like I'm working away my life? And for a brief moment in time, I thought I had that, but here we are, And I know people are going to comment like, yes, I exercise. Yes, I go to the gym. I do all that shit. I do things in my spare time. But I'm talking more about purpose. I feel like I've spent my whole life not knowing how to find purpose and pride. And maybe I'm just hyper aware of people that seem to have it. I mean, I even grew up, my dad was a firefighter, and his job was always the talk of wherever we were, and he got awards and medals for saving lives. So, he took a great deal of pride in that job. My college roommate, he really stuck out to me. When I got hired at this, coding job, I worked with a guy named Damon, and he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. Not only did he basically code a company from the ground up, but he was also kind of business oriented. He was good in social situations, just all around like a role model, and I worked pretty close with him. He's long gone now. He went off to bigger and better things, but I often think about him, just like my college roommate. How can I be that? How can I be that driven and passionate about something? And, I feel like I can't be the only one out there that feels this way. There's got to be, actually, I know there's a lot of young men who feel empty and just feel like they're getting by. They got more to give, but they don't know how. And I don't know how else to explain it besides that. You feel like you're destined to do more, but you can't find what you like or what you love, and you don't know how to find that drive. And I realized in the last few years a few things. The only time in my life I've ever been driven and motivated is when I was putting in the effort. That was the one time I can recall in my life that I felt a sense of pride, and I completed the boot camp, I got hired, and I did for a blip in time enjoy what I was doing. And I think back to my college roommate and Damon, how these people I was always so envious of. I was operating under this idea that they had this passion and motivation somehow because they landed on something that was perfect for them. They were born to do that one specific thing. There's bullshit. Like, I don't know why it took me so long to see how dumb that idea is. That's how I was operating. Like, everybody was going to find this perfect career and it was going to bring them this grand fulfillment. But that's not how it works. These guys I was always so envious of, they weren't just lucky, they were like investing in themselves. They were actually committing to something and putting in effort all the time. As humans, I don't think it's possible to fall in love with something that you're doing just to get by. Like, if you're in that day to day, do you know how easy it is to fall into that pattern of skating by, getting comfortable in the routine, not really putting in the effort? The only time in my life I felt differently was when I was pushing myself and taking an interest in myself. Passion isn't like, I don't know, going to be like the starting point. I'm not going to get hired at a job and go, fuck, I love this, day one, and then just be like, this is what I'm doing forever. You just got to find something that kind of holds your interest. And then if you're not immediately in love with it, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means you haven't given it enough time, because if you can commit to it, if you're interested enough to commit to it and you can get good at it, then I think that I love this comes later on, right? Humans love getting good at stuff. And that's what those guys did. They had just invested the majority of their time getting good at it, Damon and my college roommate. Well, I was kind of just expecting to show up to these things and being like, well, I'm supposed to love this, and then that drive will show up. But I had it backwards, I hope I explained that well. And I know this video is all about work because that's where a lot of our time goes. But I also spent, my formative years, my younger years, drinking and partying, smoking weed, doing bullshit, even all through my 20s. And I wasn't till like very recently did I start trying to figure out even who I was. Like, what the fuck do I like? I mean, this YouTube channel is proof of that. So I started doing a bunch of stuff like this YouTube channel. I always thought, hey, I wanted to make videos. So it's like, fuck it. I'll do it. I'll try it. And a bunch of other shit. I'm not going to list it all off, but I've been trying my hardest not to just skate through and put in the effort all around work, life, all that stuff. And I also want to say that, I've mentioned it before on this channel that there's this book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And there's a message in that book that I resonated with pretty strongly. That the Western world has a disease, and that the expectation of happiness and fulfillment from just existing is expected. You know, we're expecting to get that for free, essentially. And I was one of those people. You know, I still am. And I'm trying not to be. I'm trying to understand that to get a sense of pride and fulfillment, I can't just stumble upon it or wait for it to arrive. You know, you got to put in that fucking work. You got to apply yourself. And I hope this video, maybe this video just came off like a fucking therapy session. I hope not, but this is something that's been so difficult for me to wrap my head around. I've been looking for this for as long as I can remember and have never really understood like how the fuck do these people love what they do every day? So this is how I've made sense of it. Would love people's takes on this. You know, if you love what you do, if you hate what you do, if you think you know how to find it, just share, please. I'm always looking for input on this. Anyways, if you made it this far, I appreciate you. Peace.